Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Harges. Welcome to the next episode of the Back Porch Banters. Today, we have the honor of interviewing James Carli, climate change expert, master's degree, member of the Transylvania Independent Progressives, has done a lot of work, international work, coordinating climate change advocacy, coordinating new technology, scaling things up, has a lot to say, a lot to offer. We're going to discuss climate change because that's his area of expertise. We'll also jump into whatever aspects of politics we fall into because sometimes that's the fun part. Thanks for joining us, James. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Chris. Thanks for this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome. Yeah, we were talking earlier about, something that I think is kind of at the basis of some of our issues with climate change. We're talking about some of the vitriol, some of the intensity in politics that, we're using the example of Chuck Edwards came to speak in Asheville, and we're both kind of congratulating him for having the cojones to actually do such a thing, but then indicating that some of our aversion to some of his false and dangerous rhetoric was yelling and shouting him down, and we might have stopped him from saying some things that were meaningful. And that seems to be happening a lot on both sides, and climate change is unfortunately no exception.
I agree. When it comes to issues of climate, there are physics at play, like hard, quantifiable physical limits to the biosphere's habitability, for example. People will say climate change is not real. It is real. All you have to do is look at this very famous chart of the past 800,000 years of carbon emissions that have been derived from ice core drilling in Antarctica, where they're able to accurately and very precisely measure the amounts of atmospheric carbon and other gases that trap heat over, like I said, 800,000 years. Mind you, humanity, our species, has only walked the planet for about 200 to 300,000 years. So we're looking back at atmospheric chemistry from long before humanity walked the earth. And you can tell that, there were some variations about 50 to 100,000 years ago while Homo sapiens was around. There was a dip in atmospheric carbon, and that correlated with the ice ages. But then it's gone back up to that historical mean until about that year 1800, when you started having the Industrial Revolution, where the Europeans started burning coal and coal plants to produce energy to power their factories. And it started going up after that. But then specifically, ever since the 1940s and 50s, we've just blown through the roof in atmospheric carbon measurements. And that directly correlates with the rise in global average temperatures. Now, a lot of people think that the sea level rise is because the glaciers are melting, but that's actually a minor secondary contributor to the rising sea levels. What happens is carbon, which is pollution from burning oil, gas, and coal, and also methane, which is another gas that traps heat. It builds up in the atmosphere like a winter blanket around the Earth. And solar radiation, that's the heat and light from the sun, it comes through space and it goes and it hits Earth. And with all this extra carbon and methane pollution in the atmosphere, more of that solar radiation it doesn't bounce back into space like it used to.
Right, because it's a different waveform when it bounces off the Earth. Yeah. And is it a shorter waveform when it bounces off that then stops in that carbon blanket?
In terms of wavelength, I don't want to exactly specify that, but there's a process called albedo, which is the reflectivity of sunlight off of Earth's surfaces. For example, a snowy field or a glacier has high albedo because that sunlight hits that white snow and it bounces all that light back off because it's white snow. So albedo is the reflectivity of sunlight from the Earth. And with additional carbon and methane pollution and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, more of that solar radiation gets stuck between the Earth's surface and the atmosphere and does not bounce back into space. And that's like an oven heating up. And the sea level rise comes because the oceans, which constitute something like 78% of the Earth's surface, and they're dark, they absorb most of that heat. And if you remember from high school physics class, when a fluid gets warmer, the molecules expand and up to the point where they start boiling. So what's happening
not that there's more water, it's just taking up more space. It's expanding.
The ocean is heating up very rapidly, and the molecules in the ocean water are expanding, and that's the primary contributor to the rising sea levels. So this is all physics. This is all, if you take a high school, college physics class, you'll kind of understand some of these basic concepts. And I bring that up because physics is the way it is. Like if I drop this lid, right, that's gravity.
Gravity pulls it down, whether you believe in gravity or not.
Right. And the gravity on Earth is constant at 9.8 meters per second squared. And that is measurable with instruments that are calibrated to measure things. So I say that because the physics of climate change are measurable using instruments. And it doesn't matter what you believe, it doesn't matter what ideology you bring into it. This is what is happening because of human behavior over the past 250, 300 years, but especially within the past 20 years in particular, just rampant burning of coal, oil, and gas for energy creation to power our civilization.
And we need energy for our current civilization. I like driving. I like heating my house. I like having electricity. But in my perfect world, we'd have a balance where we would have this energy, have this power, grow our economy with minimal continued damage to the climate and to our own future and the future of our children.
And that's correct. The earliest human ancestors were, the hunter-gatherers in Africa would hunt because you need to eat for energy, right? So that was the very earliest form of energy. They would burn fires at night to keep warm. It's the old Greek myth about
Prometheus.
Hephaestus, right? Vulcan, the god
Uh-huh.
Vulcan, who brought fire to
Yep.
humanity, and Zeus got irritated with that because Zeus knew that would disrupt the balance of the gods. And so it goes way back to the human story, humans harnessing a fire. And now we're living with the consequences, but also the reality and the tools. We know what tools we have to mitigate this. One of which is how can we provide energy that doesn't continue to create these planet heating emissions? And that's where the renewable energy argument comes into play, because we've got solar photovoltaics, the solar panels. Wind energy is efficient, even though it's under political attack for reasons that don't make scientific sense. There's all other sorts of interesting energy sources too. If you think about the molten core of Earth generates heat, that's where we get volcanoes. That's geothermal energy. There's a lot of interesting ways that we can develop geothermal energy sources, not just in volcanically active places like the Pacific Ring of Fire, but there are ways that using mining technology from the oil and gas industry that we can drill geothermal wells for energy creation in places that are distant from thermal hotspots. So that's a potential just transition for oil and gas industry to non-emitting energy production, for example. So, and then you get into other things like tidal energy. The ocean currents have energy. There's ways to collect this technologically. There's a bunch of ways that we can capture the energy of this existing ecosystem without having to burn or combust pollutants.
Yeah, absolutely. And the transition isn't necessarily easy, but in my opinion, we're making that transition much harder by politicizing the process and, as you implied, denying the basic physics that we're up against.
Politicization comes from when vested interests feel unequipped to adapt in ways that continue generating returns for their investors. So we have the oil and gas industry. Famously before his reelection, Trump met with those oil and gas businessmen at Mar-a-Lago and basically said, if you give me $1 billion, I will do anything you want. And we're seeing the effects of that now. The new Secretary of Energy was a fracking executive, and he is now going wholesale on natural gas extraction and even coal. But the economics of coal just aren't there without massive U.S. government subsidies, which it looks like that's the direction we're going, which is going to be very harmful for our ability to get a handle on this problem, because you're going to be combusting more pollutants that increase the density of the blanket around the Earth
at taxpayer cost. And that is the crazy part. And that shows that our politics are definitely screwed, that we are paying taxpayer money for these companies to pollute our environment and make our lives more difficult. And to me, it's just the most blatant example of how out of control our politics are now, which brings us to the point of how do we fix it? You and I agree on this, and there are, probably a majority of Americans who in theory would agree with us, but actually getting people to vote accordingly and force our politicians to act responsibly is going to be difficult.
people are generally averse to change because change presents insecurities. It presents having to integrate new information that people may not feel equipped to understand. You know, our if you think back to those hunter-gatherer days, our neurological systems are hardwired for fight or flight. You know, the tribe supports one another. We can trust our tribe, and that's the social conflict right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that you're going to have people from outside my tribe come to where I live and tell me that we're going to do something new for reasons I might not understand because of historic underfunding of education, for example. Right. It's a very complicated process. There's, I mean, a problem. You know, lack of education, a fear of change, a distrust of outsiders that's particularly endemic with a lot of the Scots-Irish who are predominant here in our part of the state. I can go into the history of the Scots-Irish.
West Virginia as well. You've got a lot of these Appalachian folks that, you know,
of which I'm one. Like my ancestors came from Scotland and the Ulster Plantation in the 1730s to Shenandoah, Virginia. So I've got that Scots-Irish roots. I had a family who valued education in my life, which is why I was able to embrace this stuff. But there's a lot of folks who historically want to be left alone from the outside world because of the generational experiences of their ancestors who were exploited and abused by the English in the old country. They came here, they moved from the coastal English business cities up to the Appalachian Mountains where they could be left alone in this fierce, rugged culture of independence. You know, it's all integrated into this cultural distrust of outsiders, cultural distrust of institutions. And then you get to the point where our information streams are being polluted by hostile actors like Russia, who are taking advantage of our open social media to put divisive messages to pit us against one another. So yeah, it's a tough nut to crack, to say it lightly.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and then we've got this powerful organization, you know, currently led by Project 2025 and the Trump regime to try to capitalize on that fear of outsiders and turn that into what I would say is an attack by outsiders. If you look at the billionaire oligarchs who are kind of holding these Appalachian communities down with poor benefits, with fairly high tax rates, with poor representation in some cases with the gerrymandering, that, you know, they are that outside threat, but somehow they've put a sheep's face on this wolf. And it's one of the things that I kind of obsess over, you know, as a political activist, that how do we break this mold? How do we get people to at least start voting in their own best interests, even if they aren't voting in the best interests of humanity? If we could just get a good proportion of them voting in their own self-interest of a long-term economy, a good life for their children, a lot of these problems would solve themselves.
Well, going back to the renewable energy discussion, I was just in a meeting last week with some experts. They were talking about how around 2022 in the country of Pakistan, there were really horrendous floods in Pakistan that devastated villages. And what happened after that was a lot of these villages, they started buying these really cheap solar panels from China, because China's got an overabundance of solar panels. So, you know what that does? Overabundance of panels means the price is low. And so you had villagers in Pakistan buying these solar panels and setting them up on their own houses so that they could generate their own energy needs cleanly without having to rely on the grid that was funded by the Pakistani government. And on the one hand, it's very positive for this kind of grassroots, rugged independence of these rural mountain villagers in Pakistan after devastating floods. Now, on the other hand, you've got the government and the investors in that state utility who are saying, well, you know, you're making the grid not profitable anymore. But at the same time, these Pakistani villagers with their solar panels are completely autonomous, self-sufficient in terms of energy. And I see so many parallels between, you know, our experiences with Helene. You know, we lost power here in Transylvania County for up to 2 weeks in certain parts. So if we could, you know, popularize this idea that, hey, if you get some cheap solar panels on your house and you can become energy self-sufficient in the wake of disasters, it's going to increase your resilience, especially if you can get an electric car that is powered by your solar panels in case the gas pumps run out or something.
Stations are closed, whatever. Plug into my
so
solar.
That's an example of how, you know, you can say that this renewable energy pivot can actually serve your own interests. And there are obstacles that will come from the monopoly of the utility companies like Duke Power,
Right.
who have a lot of influence in Raleigh, to write laws to kind of make it difficult or expensive for people to do this thing that is actually in their interests, that boosts resilience, that helps reduce our emissions of pollutants, and actually builds on our cultural attributes of autonomy and individualism.
Absolutely. I like that angle. And you're right that Duke is actively trying to stop this. The way that they structure their mandatory buyback of solar power resets, I think, in mid to late June, which is a pretty large ripoff. If you're running solar on your house, you only get paid for a small portion of it. And that's because the lobbyists have set up this law to say, oh, yeah, we pay for power, we pay for it, but they don't actually pay for very much of it. And, you know, there's lots of other things they're doing. And I think under the current strengthening Republican regime in North Carolina and the Trump administration as well, it's going to get a lot easier for these corporations to write their own rules and to push down this independent-minded energy independence that you're speaking of, which I think is a large solution, especially for people, like you said, who have that independent mindset here in the Appalachians.
Well, that's exactly right. You know, but the economics of it will flip, because on the one hand, you've got the tech companies and the AI companies and the data centers who are working hand in glove with these massive utility companies to get the in North Carolina. Duke last year reclassified nuclear energy as green energy, and Duke is working on increasing utility payer rates, that our power bills, to go ahead and prepay for this nuclear infrastructure that they haven't even built yet. So our rates are going up for a nuclear infrastructure that we haven't even built yet, in anticipation of the rise of AI and data centers consuming a lot more of our power demand. And so what's going to happen is, if you're on the grid, your utility bills are going to go so high that it may become economical regardless to just buy heavily tariffed Chinese solar panels, find some outlaw electricians to help you bootstrap a rig on your house, and do it yourself. And that's kind of the outlaw culture that we have around here in moonshine country, for example. So, I mean, it always comes back down to economics. I mean, people are going to get the energy they need one way or another. Regulations be damned.
Right. I like that thought, because that's always been the crux to me is, what do you pay for clean energy? If it's cheaper to buy dirty energy, that's what people are going to do. But if it becomes cheaper and more effective to have your own clean energy, that's going to push us in that direction a whole lot faster than any legislation ever could.
And they're still making solar panels in the U.S. just a little bit, but in China, out of control. And yes, there's tariffs on Chinese solar panels, but you know, there's, like I said, it's supply and demand. That price point is going to be that magic switch. And I'm not an energy economist, but I'm economically literate enough to know that there is a point. I just don't know what it is, but it's a conversation worth having.
Yeah, for sure. And looking back at the discussion of the flood in Pakistan, Helene opened a lot of people's eyes, like you said, to the need for energy independence and the danger of climate change. I mean, you look at 32 inches of rain in Busick, North Carolina over the course of a few days. I mean, if you calculate the 100-year, 500-year, 1,000-year flood, you get up into the mid 30,000s before you say how often this is supposed to happen. And here we're seeing it in our lifetimes in real time here. This shows that the climate is screwed up. It makes it a lot less deniable that climate change is real and that we're accelerating it. I'm not a bit happy for what happened with Helene. I was personally hit very hard financially by it, as well as socially and in my lifestyle. But if there's a silver lining and it gets people to think about climate change and be willing to put some energy into it, then we'll take that.
We'll take that. And it was an absolute tragedy. And it was, I try not to think. It was difficult for lots of folks. Going back to the physics, though, again, the more pollutants in the atmosphere, the warmer the atmosphere gets. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. And so what happens is it gets more humid more often, but at the same time, it rains less often because the historic balance is out. So there's more and more atmospheric moisture until it becomes too heavy that it falls to earth as torrential floods in between periods of drought. And what happens is, if you have an area that's experienced drought that then gets inundated with heavy rains and floods, that soil becomes a lot looser and you get increased landslides. And landslides will chop apart utility lines, underground sewer lines and water lines, power lines. And especially in mountain regions like this, it's a quadruple whammy of drought periods followed by heavy rains impacted by landslides, and then the droughts feed the fire risk from fallen trees.
Yeah.
And according to some FEMA experts that I know, Western North Carolina has the highest human wildland interface density proportion of anywhere in the country. So
We are
if
quite
you think
mixed
about
in with
how
the landscape due to the valley mountain terrain.
the valley mountain terrain, the way that even our remote towns have allowed, these neighborhoods and sprawl to go up in these wooded areas,
Yeah.
you have more people living in heavily wooded areas that increases fire risk. So it's this interlocking problem that's contributed to the historic accumulation of pollution in the atmosphere.
What are some other ways you can think of that we can economically soundly improve our lives and improve the climate at the same time, or reduce our impact on it?
Yeah, my background's in urban planning, and I've always been an advocate. Like, I like to hike. I'm a hiker, and I like to ride my bicycle. And I don't really like driving cars because it's cars are inelegant, if you will. You've got to find somewhere to park. There's traffic that's always bad. If I can just
Great to be
walk to
able
the
to bike to work
store,
or the grocery store.
yeah, if I can just walk to meet my needs to the store, go hang out with friends, walk or ride my bike. That's why I like living near downtown Brevard, where we have bike trails, because I've got a couple e-bikes. I can just hop on them. It's more fun. It's more active. It keeps me healthy. So one thing I would do is be conscious about the type of environment you choose to live in. If you can live in a place that's more walkable, that's closer to services that you need, I think your quality of life will increase. Your general personal emissions will go down overall. It's easier to charge an e-bike battery with a solar panel than a whole electric car, although, either are better than burning oil in your car.
Right.
And admittedly, I don't have an electric car yet, but I do have those 2 electric bikes that I ride most of the time. 90% of my life in Brevard is on those bikes.
That's great.
So, yeah, so it's you get a more active lifestyle. It's more social. You're closer to your friends and bars and music down the street. And so be mindful. A lot of Americans, they're happy to get a house where they can, if it's in a neighborhood or a suburb way out that makes them have to drive everywhere. It's not something Americans often think about. But if you can just have a little bit of awareness about what kind of lifestyle you want, and if you like an active, healthy lifestyle where you're not always having to be stuck in traffic, choose a walkable, dense community.
And I'll chime in on this one. One of the hats I wear professionally is real estate developer. Okay. I've done a fair bit of it, and I'm in contact with the community of real estate developers, especially here in Asheville and Buncombe County. And unfortunately, Buncombe County and especially Asheville discourage high density in-town development. I don't know if they're doing it intentionally, but the actual functional result of their regulations is that it pushes us as developers to use 3/4 acre lots out on the mountains, carve in more roads, and build McMansions. That's what's profitable, due to the regulations making in-town high-density development so incredibly expensive, time-consuming, and difficult. And I've talked to Sierra Club reps, I've talked to other climate experts such as yourself, and the consensus seems to be that we should be doing higher density in-town development to create that lifestyle and to leave open areas outside. But for some reason, Asheville, a town which professes to be democratic and professes to be progressive, doesn't have workable bike lanes, doesn't have easy to build high density and mixed use housing within town. And it's something I would really like to solve. I'm kind of at a loss. I've been squawking at Asheville and Buncombe County and have gotten just run around and haven't gotten any real answers on it. And I've made some donations and voted people in and voted people out as a result, but I don't see a major change. And it's something I'd like to see improved.
My advice would be look for alliances. Asheville's got, I think it's called Asheville on Bikes, which is a great core of people who like to get around on bikes. There's a urban planner. He's an internationally renowned urban planner named Joe Minicozzi, who does a lot of research into the substantial tax value of density in urban planning.
Yes.
And he's got a broad network and very well connected there in Asheville. He lives in Asheville.
Okay.
He's got his, I think it's called, not World 3, that's the Club of Rome thing. Urban 3 Labs. Joe Minicozzi is his name.
Okay,
and,
Joe Minicozzi. I'll look him up.
You connect with Joe Minicozzi, you connect with the Asheville on Bikes team, and you kind of network with those allies that can help you get in the direction you want. I think that's a way to kind of amplify the impact you'd like to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Because I do think that's something that would help, because to me, it's a double whammy. It's a better lifestyle when you can bike, when you can walk, when you don't have to drive 20 minutes into town. And
Yeah.
then more importantly, you can drive out of town and into the mountains instead of driving out of town into a bunch of strip malls and suburban developments, which is what's
Yeah,
happening.
I've got a
down the
downtown
mountains and along the way.
preservationist friend here in Brevard. He likes to call them suburban ubiqua buildings. You know, the kind of like, it's okay. You got a Motel 8 like 3 blocks from your downtown core. It doesn't look great. You know, you could have had land use regulations that would encourage the developer to build something that actually looks like a downtown building instead of, you know, like a suburban ubiquitous strip mall that you see across America.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. There's that too. I mean, there's that keeping Asheville attractive
Mhm.
as much as we want it to be anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And there's also some argument for just decreasing the population in general, but doing it through expensive development restriction is kind of doing the wrong thing, because it's increasing traffic, it's increasing destruction of the mountains. So yeah, I'll look those guys up and work with them to try to improve this process a bit.
Hey, you're welcome. For sure. Yeah. I mean, the urban question globally in America and in the Southeast and in North Carolina, but also around the world, there's a global trend of urbanization.
Yeah.
I think 100 years ago, only like 30% of people lived in cities.
Mhm.
And right now it's about 50%. And I think by
Mhm.
the middle of this century, it's going to be about like 70 or 80%
Oh,
of the
wow.
world's people will live in cities.
Uh-huh.
And there's a UN agency called UN Habitat that kind of coordinates a lot of global efforts around what is sustainable urban design. So that would be another resource. And there's there's a couple of things you should look into. There's the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. I think that's what it's called.
Okay.
And then there's also an international NGO called ICLEI, ICLEI, ICLEI. It's a
Okay.
global NGO, but they have chapters nationally and even in the Southeast that help coordinate builders, sustainability professionals, climate experts. And for example, here in the city of Brevard, one of the things I helped spearhead in the past 2 years, Brevard has just launched a Brevard Sustainability Council. And
Okay.
it's got a local volunteers, some environmental scientists from Brevard College, some retired academics. I advise on it as a land use perspective. We've officially been adopted in June or July by the City Council of Brevard to be a City Council advisory board to help them create resilience action plans. And cities that have resilience action plans on their books can pursue new streams of funding for projects that will help achieve goals like walkability, energy, self-sufficiency, maybe even grants for citizens or residents to improve their own self-sufficiency. And iClay is one of the resources that the sustainability councils are looking into. And I would also direct you and your audience to the Citizens Climate Lobby that I've been involved with for 3 years, who's been around for a long time. And it's a national group of grassroots volunteers like us, like me, to work at both the city level, wherever you live. And that's how I got involved helping Brevard launch the Sustainability Council. But they also lobby state governments on these policies. And last summer, I actually went to DC for their big national lobby day. It was over 1,000 CCL volunteers from across the country, all 50 states, meeting with our senators and representatives. I think we met with, what was it, like 540 legislators, and we had meetings with like 510 of them throughout a day with key pieces of the legislation. So if that's where you really want to get involved on some of this stuff at all levels of government, that's another great resource. And they were the ones how I found out about how iClay provides resources for local towns and cities to build some of this stuff out.
Excellent. Now I'm happy to hear that too. I want to circle back for a sec on the kind of in-town development with this idea that I've cooked up as a developer, which sounds a bit counterintuitive to come from a developer. So if you're developing land in Asheville, it's extremely expensive in time and money. I would say make it just as expensive, but instead of having a bunch of regulatory hurdles that cost you time and money, instead have developers pay a tax per acre to develop land, not per unit as we're paying now. We're paying a high amount per unit to develop. Instead, have developers pay something like $100 grand, $120 to develop an acre of urban land. And for that money, Asheville would guarantee that you don't have regulatory hurdles, that you follow the directions, but that they do the engineering. You don't have 6-month project delays. You don't have unexpected redoing of plans due to their confusion, which is what's happening now. So instead, use that money for trails, for parks, for greenways, for improving traffic. And so that way you have truly sustainable development, where instead of just looking at this 1 acre, you're looking at, okay, the developer is going to develop this acre. Traffic on this road is going to be higher. We need to put a bike lane there. People now need a park to hang out in. We're going to use some of that money with some of the money from this other development to then buy this piece of land, keep it as green space, turn it into a park. And that's kind of my simplistic thought of how we solve this interdevelopment problem, is to tax developers by the land instead of by the unit, and use that money to carve up some green space and to put in some bike lanes.
Well, you're familiar with the philosophy of Henry George, right? The land value tax philosophy. Henry George was a 19th century economist and turned politician who had his land value tax idea, which is exactly what you're talking about. That we should tax land rather than the buildings on the land for its value. And then what that will actually do is incentivize denser, more sustainable development, so that you can generate higher revenues, so that you're not just owning a big old parking lot where you're generating passive income based on the activity around you, but you have a higher incentive to generate revenue by developing that lot and putting it to better use. So the land value tax issue is one that's I'm very passionate about. It's been around a long time. It's sometimes called the perfect tax, because land is fixed in its quantity and can generate enough revenues if taxed to basically fund most of government functions, and up to the point of being enough to replace income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes. So it's sometimes called the perfect tax, the land value tax. And I will send you, do what?
It would be great to simplify the tax code as well.
Absolutely. And there was a think tank that wrote a really interesting proposal a couple of years ago. How would a land value tax work in North Carolina? And they used examples around Raleigh. And I will send you that information.
Yeah, thank you, James.
Yeah.
No, that's exciting.
So what you're talking about has legs, and it's a good idea, and it's worth discussing. Again, someone like Joe Minikazi will be a great resource for you.
Good. Now I'll definitely get in touch with him. You mentioned earlier carbon recapture technology. This is something that's really exciting because it could potentially buy us some time in this transition. It would give us perhaps more time to wean off carbon, and perhaps an ability to mitigate some of the worst damage that we've already done, which to me is very exciting.
Yeah, so in terms of carbon capture and carbon removal, terminology gets very important here, using the right words. There's a lot of attention from Wall Street around things like direct air capture. We can just plug in these giant fans that'll suck carbon dioxide out of the sky. It sounds great. It sounds like a magic bullet. But if you look at the energy requirements for these machines, you're going to spend as much or more energy to get them up and running than they'll ever take out of the atmosphere. However, it's a joke that what's the most efficient way to remove carbon from the atmosphere? It's trees. Okay.
Yeah.
Because trees breathe in carbon dioxide, and then they use it to grow, and then they spit back out oxygen that we need to breathe. Now, what if we could take that basic concept and accelerate? There's a process called biomass carbon removal and sequestration, BICRS, where you can take biomass, which is anything organic, fallen trees in the woods after Helene, coffee shavings if you have a coffee plantation, cow manure if you have a dairy farm, for example, corn shavings after you've harvested all your corn and you just got this heap of waste corn, for example, anything organic like that, municipal solid waste, sewage from cities. All of this stuff eventually is considered right now primarily waste that is just left to rot. And then when it's rotting, it emits methane and carbon dioxide. But through a process called the biomass carbon removal, and an ancient process developed by the Amazonians over 10,000 years ago, you can have a process called pyrolysis, where you take this biomass in a no oxygen environment at very high heat, and you convert it into a pure carbon form that is stable. And it's called biochar. And biochar is one of the, actually, of all the ways that they propose removing carbon, it's the one that's actually delivered the most gross carbon removal so far to date. Now, you get into biochar, there's a lot of misinformation and bad information out there.
Sure.
Biochar is like a pie. Like there's apple pies, there's mincemeat pies, there's rhubarb pies, but all pies have a crust and they all go in the oven. So in that respect, biochar is the same. But if you put certain types of trees you're going to get a different biochar chemistry output than other types of trees than you will if you use municipal solid waste, than you will if you use cow manure or farm waste. So you have to have some scientists and agronomists who can understand the chemical composition of the feedstock going into the pyrolysis process and the type of biochar composition that'll come out, because every biochar composition has different uses. Some you can put back into soils, which will help the soils retain water and nutrients. But if you use the wrong chemical composition of biochar in a soil, it can actually devastate the soil, and you can ruin farmland. So
you did it wrong. It's chemistry. You can do chemistry wrong.
You can do chemistry wrong, but a lot of folks who are like, oh, I just take this mass and I charcoal it and then I put it in the dirt, and they don't know what they're doing, they're going to there's a huge risk that they could cause a lot more problems than they're trying to solve.
That makes sense.
But at the same time, char output has all sorts of industrial uses. You can put it in cosmetics. You can put it in asphalt to create like a super strong ultralight asphalt alternative or filler that actually helps to sink this atmospheric carbon from this waste biomass into a stable form of infrastructure. So there's all sorts of stuff that can be done with it.
That is exciting.
Yeah, it's part of the whole circular economy concept. So how do we get a hold of all this biomass waste that's all around us and put it to actual commercial use?
And that's the question, is got to find a way to make it profitable, make it easier or more profitable. And then after that happens, introduce it and get people over the fear of change.
That's right. And you'll be, I advise a firm that's got some technology that can do this at a large, that can intake much greater scales of biomass than any competitor on the market right now. And we're actively pursuing some European climate financing to help scale this up around the world at an infrastructure scale. This is not just a project by project base, but for example, if you owned a tract of forest out here in Transylvania County and you had a lot of deadfall, and that forest was technically a brown field because of the trees that were down and it wasn't really useful otherwise, our company would set up a joint venture with you as the property owner and us bringing in the technology to process that. And you would get, if you're a farmer or a timber owner or a restaurant magnate or something, and you have a lot of this organic waste, you would get proceeds from how we buy the mass from you. That's profit for you. We would sell it to the final product to our off takers and our clients. And then that would generate revenue for us, for you as a local homeowner or property owner, and it would generate meaningful income in very rural places that have high biomass quantities.
That's a great possibility. I mean, I think that paired with getting people more independent minded and getting people more into solar and other means would be really helpful. And I think with that, we got to kind of circle back to the propaganda and the anti-climate change and the kind of this idea that the oil industry has taught us that we can't have a stable climate without destroying our economy. And I think we kind of need
that's just not true at all.
It's not true at all. And you and I, people like us, need to find ways to break down the BS, to get people to look at things objectively, which is tough. When the
a lot of politicians understand the idea that you've got a coal mine or an oil well, and if you take it out, you can create energy and things of value, right? But now we've taken all that out of the ground, and now the great mine of the future is all of the carbon in the atmosphere. So if we can get them to think that we don't have to crash our economy, we have to pivot industry from taking things out of the ground to taking things out of the sky. And then we can keep creating the same things of value for our economy and our livelihoods and our industries around the world.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I would love to see that continue, because I would like for the Southeast to be a place where it rains often and we get good rain and I can go kayaking and the grass grows and we don't get these massive floods followed by droughts and vice versa. It would be awesome to see that. It'd be great to see stability in sea levels and a lot of these ocean communities who've lived the same lifestyle for hundreds of thousands of years to still have that lifestyle and not be flooded and inundated. And especially areas that are already. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, fixing the climate is the biggest economic opportunity that humanity has ever seen. We just have to get our politicians to understand that, and to understand that the oil, gas, and coal is either mostly depleted what's economically already, and won't be. It's a zombie industry, no matter how the subsidies. So now is the time to be investing in the infrastructure of restoring the climate so that we actually do have a thriving economy deep into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really like that thought. I hope that we can kind of keep the momentum going in that direction. Anything else you can think of? Anything else we ought to go over or talk about or work on here? You come up with some great ideas. I really like it.
If I could just say that it's important that we love our neighbors as ourselves, no matter where they come from, especially those who have been relocated here from other countries because they have faced violence or persecution or conflict in their places, and to remember, essentially the lessons of Christ, that the love of the soul is universal. We're all just beings of creation here on this space rock, and borders are kind of arbitrary, and overcome our superficial tribal, ethnic, linguistic divisions and recognize we're all human beings. We all want to be safe. We all want to thrive. We all want to have opportunity. We all have human rights that are protected, by laws or should be protected by laws that are endowed by the Creator and not from government. So
Absolutely.
freedom will reign in the hearts of men and women who yearn for safety and liberty. So don't be an asshole. Don't be racist. Be nice to immigrants. Welcome everybody. Build a longer table and not a fence.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those ideas. And you look at the power of immigrants in America, what they've done, what we've done. I'm an immigrant. You're an immigrant. Unless you're a Native American, you're an immigrant to this country. And, the power of what immigrants have done is huge. We've built this melting pot of a nation that is awesome. And I think to demonize the more recent immigrants while pretending like we have some greater right to be here than they do is false. I also am entirely with you that I would love to see the Christian religion face itself and look itself in the mirror and actually follow the teachings of Christ. There are plenty of real Christians out there who are proponents of equality, of helping the poor, of loving your neighbor, of truly loving your neighbor, no matter what color they are or where they came from. But unfortunately, I think that we as, and I'm speaking the greater we of Democrats, liberals, have allowed the white Christian nationalists to tell America who God wants them to vote for. And it's sad, in my opinion, even without calling myself a Christian, I'm offended at what Christianity has become in America.
Well, and forgive me, your mic was buzzing a little bit. It might have been my speaker, so you may want your editors to adjust that.
Okay, I'll check on that. Thank you.
But I agree, this whole idea of Christian nationalism comes from this idea that is fringe within mainstream theology, extraordinarily fringe, not biblically rooted at all, that the United States was destined to be a New Jerusalem for the descendants of Europeans. That's not in the Bible anywhere. Europe wasn't in the Bible anywhere, except for Rome, I guess, but in Greece. But that is the root of a lot of the tribalism. And the problem with identity is that, going back to that idea of the hunter-gatherer people who only trust the tribe and see outsiders as a threat, that is people get that way when they feel when they experience scarcity and insecurity. And the reason people are feeling that way today is, upward mobility is an all-time low. If you're born poor, you're probably going to stay poor. If you're born rich, you're going to become rich and stay rich. And it's hard to go from being poor to being rich. And so, NAFTA in the 90s and the free trade agreement of the 90s created, Ross Perot was right when he said there would be a giant sucking sound of manufacturing jobs. And we're living in the wake of that. A lot of, lower and middle income folks who grew up in the 70s and 80s with their parents having good incomes and expecting a reliable middle class lifestyle are now recognizing that if they want to pay their bills, they're going to take jobs they feel is beneath their dignity. And that's offending their own sense of identity. And so they're starting to react in antisocial ways. And so, there are a lot. It's all being compounded by economic inequality. The rich people are getting phenomenally richer, and it's coming at the expense of people in rural and low income areas who are acting out of genuine fear of this economic displacement, economic loss, an offense to their sense of personal integrity and identity. So that they're gathering in these bands to lash out at anybody they see as an institutional representative of the drivers of that inequality. But that word is difficult because we've been so acculturated in the United States to oppose people who talk about increasing equality. That those people are damn dirty communists,
Mm-hmm.
who are going to take my whatever.
Right.
I'm telling you, man.
The defensiveness is incredible.
Do what?
The defensiveness is incredible.
Yeah.
When you talk about the greater good, the first thing people think of is it's taking from me.
From me, inequality is so bad. Large numbers are very hard for people to understand. The amount of wealth that Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Larry Ellison have, people cannot understand it in their minds. The idea that, okay, you think a lawyer or a doctor who earns $200,000 a year is rich. We're talking about people who earn who have wealth magnitudes greater than a doctor or anesthesiologist or high-powered corporate lawyer would earn in 10,000 lifetimes. So when we talk about, I think about how the rich in the early 1900s, the Rockefellers and everybody, were driven by this sense of noblesse oblige. Those who have a responsibility to give back. And so you had a lot of those 19th century barons use a lot of their wealth to invest in generous public projects, public parks, massive train stations, with a focus on using their wealth to benefit society and the people who live within it. And for some reason, the ultra rich today, I'm talking like the mega multi-billionaires who have 6 yachts and a whole fleet of airplanes, and those are the people, when we talk about that we need to, I'm going to say it, tax the rich. It's a simple, if Bernie Sanders's plan for a wealth tax had gone into effect, Elon Musk's, who's worth nearly $400 billion, he would have paid about $2 billion in taxes to Social Security by lifting the Social Security wealth cap. And it would have fully funded Social Security for decades to come. He wouldn't have even noticed it. It would have been a rounding error for him. And that's just one man of the richest. So there are ways that we can do this that would not harm your local farmer, your local shop owner, your local factory owner. If you have $2 to $5 million of net
if you look at, I don't know if you're familiar with patriotic millionaires.
Oh yeah, I am familiar with them.
Yeah, but their plan is basically to tax capital gains the same way you tax regular income, and potentially not even necessarily add a wealth tax for the ultra wealthy that's relatively small. And then people earning under $45,000 a year pay 0 federal taxes. People earning the average $62,000 a year in West North Carolina would pay maybe $2,000 or $3,000 in taxes, in federal taxes, if that. And it would be completely affordable with no more deficit. It would be that easy to do, but the political power is held by the wealthy. And the bigger paradox to me is that you talk about these people who've been disenfranchised by NAFTA, by industrialization, by all these economic changes. Their reaction has been to vote for an administration that is actively widening that wealth and power gap. And this is the disconnect that I'm trying to solve. It's the biggest reason I got into politics, is to try to help people understand that, yes, there's a need to fix things. Yes, there's a need to fix this gap. Yes, your economic lifestyle is threatened. And no, the current regime is not the answer. We need to, in my mind, force the Democratic Party to really aggressively solve these problems. And organizations like Patriotic Millionaires are doing so. And my hope is that we can force the next generation of Democratic politicians to really answer and fix these problems. Do it solidly and do it in such a way that runs off the false populism of the Trump regime.
The false populism rooted in nativism, taking advantage of tribalism and racial and ethnic fears of some other. It's the great meme of Rupert Murdoch looking at a white man with one cookie. And Rupert Murdoch's got a mound of cookies. He's looking at the white man with one cookie and saying, "Careful, mate, that immigrant across the table from you who has no cookies is trying to steal your one cookie." Meanwhile, Rupert Murdoch's got all these cookies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, their ability to swindle people and sell a false narrative has been phenomenal. I mean, it's nothing but evil genius. Like, I've got to give them credit where credit is due.
Credit where credit is due. And going back to the idea of energy independence, if you can create your own energy with a solar panel on your house, that you either don't play the games of the utility monopolies that are owned by the billionaire shareholders, all of a sudden you're going to find yourself having a lot more abundance in terms of, oh, I want to drive to visit my friend an hour away. I can do that and not have to worry about gas, and because I've got the power from the sun, you know. And all of a sudden, when there's a storm and everybody else's power is out, you're the guy who can keep their food cold in your refrigerator powered by the sun. And I think that by building up that independent autonomy and resilience, that we can have 1 million households of freedom that can form their own power bases to resist what we're being force-fed by these corporate billionaire oligarchs.
Absolutely. I'd like to see the same thing happening for information. And it's happening to some extent with all the memes and all the interpretive speakers that you get on Facebook, TikTok, and whatever. But I'd like to see people getting their news from their friends, from their families, from their unions, from their towns, and looking at what's actually happening on the ground, instead of, you know, getting these grandiose ideas of, oh, the Democrats are doing these horrible things, the Republicans are doing all these horrible things, the world's going to end if you vote for these people. I would like to see that same kind of independence go to the media and go to our thought and our interpretation of politics. And I think we may be heading that way as things get more and more ridiculous, with the mainstream media getting taken over by the current administration. And, you know, with it being so polarized, my hope is that that polarization pushes people towards the middle.
Yes, with a huge caveat. On the one hand, in terms of information, yes, the American corporate media ecosystem is very corrupted at this point in history. However, we are still able to access a lot of really quality global information. I'm going to shout out the BBC in the United Kingdom. There's the German public broadcaster Deutsche Welle, or DW. They have a free app for your TVs and your phones. There's the Japanese broadcaster NHK. Up in Canada, you have CBC. And we've still got NPR, even though their public funding has been wrecked by ideologue right-wing billionaires funding Republican politicians. I would say that public media, both domestically and around the world, and through independent outlets here in Asheville, we've got Mountain Express. We've got the Asheville Watchdog. I'm going to shout those guys out. You've got to really diversify your media diet. I would say approach the independent or social media journalists with caution, because you have a lot of folks who have some kind of ideological bent, who are, and then also the social media algorithms are designed to feed you what you want within your own biases and not expose you to information that challenges it. So if you're going to create journalistic content on social media, you've got to be hyper aware of deploying journalistic ethics, approaching everything you see on your screen with a critical eye, asking yourself a question. Well, this guy on Instagram said this happened. Well, what is he not saying? What is the opinion of other people who witnessed that event? Did it actually happen? So I would say it's better to lean on those accessible public broadcasters and independent, credible journalistic outfits than on social media, unless on social media, you know, media literacy is a huge education gap in this country. I had classes in media literacy up at UNC Asheville and App State, and broadcasting at App State, and then my policy education, how to approach these things. But most people in America, 50% of Americans read at a 6th grade level or less. That's a challenge. That is difficult to penetrate, to get people to do more than just see something sensational on their screen, stop, question it, and investigate further, because attention spans are historic lows.
You mentioned that combination of low literacy and low attention span makes it really hard to get real news out and get people really thinking about these issues.
I encourage everybody, go to your local library, talk to your librarians. If you've seen something on the internet or on the news that frightens you or that you don't understand, go to the library and ask a librarian for a book or a real thoughtful journalistic article that explains it. That's a huge resource. And that's how you can kind of distill and dispel some of the clouds of misinformation and lies that are in our information ecosystem.
I like that thought as well. Yeah, there's a lot of power there. Yeah. I'm about out of time. I gotta get stuff ready for the kids coming home here in about 15 minutes. But thank you so much for your time, James. This has been great.
You're welcome, man. Yeah, just eat local, love your neighbors, love the immigrants, question the things you see. Renewable energy is autonomy and independence. And be aware that there are entrenched interests from the fossil fuel industries and the automotive industries who are passing policies that are not in your interests. And you've got to understand those forces that are impacting your beliefs and the way you see the world. And then you've got to be diligent in challenging that. There's a famous line, it was attributed to Thomas Jefferson, but it was from an Irish poet. What was it? Eternal diligence is the price of liberty.
Absolutely.
So
it doesn't maintain itself. We got to keep fighting for it.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's keep doing it. Keep up the good fight.
Yeah, Chris, it's great to meet you, and thanks for this opportunity to expound on a lot of the things I'm up to. And let's keep in touch. I'll send you some more resources offline as well.
Good. Yeah, please do. Please do. Looking forward to coordinating with some of those folks you've mentioned.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And I'll see you around.
All right. Sounds great, James. Have a great day.